So yeah, I'm Josiah, and I'm the founder of Turbo, which is a game engine company. And I'm here to basically talk about on-chain gaming and how I'm thinking of Fluent and Turbo working together. In general, I think on-chain gaming is a cool new space. It's something that a lot of people have a lot of different thoughts on, and no one has fully, cracked the code on what makes an on-chain game accessible to the larger consumer base of gamers out there in the world. And I guess that's partly what I'm really excited about starting this venture is, giving more access to developers to participate in that journey. So we'll dive into that more a little bit later. But yeah, nice to meet everybody.
Awesome. Yeah, super. Hey everyone. Super pumped to have you on here, Josiah, and talk on-chain games. Just for those who are new, I am
Who's
Dino,
next?
one of the co-founders of Fluent, and we are building a ZK Wasm L2 for Ethereum. And there are a couple of different, I think, avenues that'll be really interesting to explore with Turbo. And I'm sure we'll get into that for sure. But yeah, on-chain gaming is something that we are very interested in optimizing for and supporting. So let's dive in.
Awesome. Yeah. He was just joking. He's basically an intern for Fluent. But yeah, anyways. Um, but yeah, I think moving on to the discussions about like before we move on to like knowing what Turbo is, what Fluent is, all the integration details, I feel like so a lot of people are interested about on-chain games just because of all the narratives that's coming from the developer communities, all the narratives that's coming from the VC's perspective, right? And then we go on to all of these events that's happening all around the world. There's like huge setups being planned for or maybe the conversations that's happening around on-chain games that makes us exciting. But I think we like for someone who's new into this space and they want some sort of high level overview of like what's going on, like what's the scene within the ecosystem, or maybe like what's the current state of like on-chain games, given all these excitements that's coming from different horizons, right? What are some of the key challenges? Maybe if you can like list all of these things down for us, maybe, and then maybe talk about like opportunity as well. Like how can a developer get excited about building on-chain games, and what exactly is it that makes like all of the sudden people have started talking about on-chain games? Like why is everyone bullish?
Wow. Yeah, I guess I'll speak because I'm incredibly bullish. I'm bullish because it's something that opens up the ability, I think, for a lot of new use cases in game development. This is something that's been, happening for decades, and I think like, having blockchains involved unlocks new use cases, particularly autonomous worlds, is like the big thing I think that's really exciting from like a game design standpoint. And the really simple explanation is that it's giving control of the game logic to players, more or less, and allowing games to even connect to each other, which is something that you can't really do in today's world, at least not easily. You can have ecosystems within a game where you might have, a library of mods or, community that's into making mods for a single game. But the concept of, any game being able to talk to any other game and players truly being able to set the rules for a game. That's something that I'm truly excited about. And I think that's actually like a really legit use case for Web3 that people don't really think of initially, I think, when they think about on-chain games.
Right. And I think so. I basically attended one of the conversations in one of the events. I don't remember, like, I think it was the autonomous, I think it was assembly or something. Yeah, I can't remember the name, but they mentioned something about how on-chain games have like they fall under a spectrum where there are certain rules and certain yeah, just there's some sort of I would say like details that goes into when you're saying like these games are on-chain games versus these games are autonomous worlds, right? So how do you make like what is it that makes it different? Like what kind of games do you consider as on-chain games versus the games that you would call autonomous worlds? Like what's the spectrum?
Yeah, there's quite a spectrum. I think when we talk about Web3 games, there's really two buckets that people in today's world like to put things into. And it's fully on chain or not, basically. So, fully on chain games, sometimes you see this acronym FOCG. That's what is basically when you have a game where all the logic for the game lives on chain and you can play it even without an interface if you want to. You could participate fully on a protocol level, and this would be something like, say, Dark Forest, a game where you actually end up having a lot of bots involved and things like that because that's part of the way you can actually play the game. Something where it might be not fully on chain, but still, a Web3 game might be a game where assets are NFTs, or where you might have part of your game on chain, maybe a scoreboard, or even like your friend graph or something like that. And a lot of these games, I think, that exist on the spectrum of like not fully on chain, don't really have much precedent yet. So that's also exciting. Seeing what people might build that is a fully on chain game is super cool. But seeing what people might build that is partly on chain, for me, is just as exciting because you can get value, say, even just reading data on chain. If you were super lazy or you weren't a big believer in Web3, you could still derive value by looking at the data on chain without forcing your users to have a wallet or submit transactions. So there's a lot of space. I would consider that like maybe in some future use case, there might be a game that players might simply play the game, and a lot of the data for the game might come on chain, and there might be a group of people that's actually doing more of the on-chain logic for the game, for the autonomous worlds and things like that. And there might be just like two different total camps for how people are involved in the game: the people that are more on the Web3 side and the people that are more on the player side. So that's just a theoretical postulation here, and we're gonna, I guess, find out over the coming like years what people actually end up doing. But anyways, that's like a long-winded way of saying like, yeah, autonomous worlds could be like fully on chain. They could be partly on chain. It depends on what kind of a participant you are in the ecosystem.
Right, interesting. Yeah, so I think one way that I was thinking about is that yeah, I think you're right about autonomous worlds versus on-chain games. But I think on-chain games it could be like literally anything. So if I have like a Web2 game going on, and if I let's say integrate like a wallet connect before you play stuff, like I mean, is that something that we consider an on-chain game, or you would say like nah, it's just a way to onboard stuff like people.
I would say it's more of a way to onboard people, actually. I think if you're making like a fully on-chain game versus partly on-chain game, the entire logic for the game has to be on-chain, and you should be able to play the game without any kind of interface. And that's why I think fully on-chain games might be impractical for most people to play and for most people to build, and that it's okay to to do both. It's okay to have a fully on-chain game and just know your audience. If that's who you're targeting, that's awesome, and you should go for it. And for everybody else, it doesn't make your game any worse to be partly on chain or to even just integrate one aspect, like connecting your wallet or something like that. It's all progress, and there's so many ways to make a game. I think it's silly to limit people and to label things in a way that prevents people from exploring their creativity and making something new and fun, because that's really what we want, is we want fun games.
Yeah. Yeah, true, true. And what is it exactly that you're building at Turbo? Is it games? Is it a platform where like developers can make on-chain games? Like, what exactly are you guys building?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny because I think there's been like a number of things that people think of when they think of Web3 game engine. And Turbo is a little bit different. I think when we think of Web3 game engine, we might think of Mud, or we might think of Dojo, and they're great tools. And Turbo basically is not involved with like the protocol layer at this moment. We don't do any of the like on-chain programs. what we do is we focus on the actual like traditional, concept of a game engine, which is like the thing that handles user input and renders graphics. And what that means is like when you have a game engine that knows about Web3, RPC APIs, when it can easily connect to a blockchain, it basically reduces the friction. It lets you integrate with those protocols. So if you wanted to, you could make, your ZK, or your StarkNet program, whatever you're trying to do, and you could talk to it from Turbo without having to configure Unity with like a ton of plugins. The other thing that Turbo does is it actually gives you Rust and WASM as like the language and bytecode target for your games. So this lets you, I think, if you're working in certain ecosystems, like let's say Fluent, have more of a natural sort of like monolithic stack when it comes to making your game. You don't have to work in like a ton of different languages. You can choose one language and you can ship your game. So yeah. So anyways, like Turbo is the game engine, the thing that renders the graphics and connects to the blockchain, and it integrates with Web3 protocols, which is a little bit different from everybody else. So you can combine, different Web3 game engines with Turbo if you want to. And we also do make games because you need to make games to kind of show developers what's up, how do you use Turbo. And we have like a demos repo with like a bunch of small games. Turbo is very focused on like small, quick games for people who are really either making something casual, something fast, or are new to game development. And in the future, what we'll also do is we'll have more of like a proper marketplace where you can actually distribute your games on the web and possibly on mobile and stuff like that as well. So yeah, I'll probably tweet more about what's coming up. There might be some other exciting things like AI-driven code generation and sprite generation, networking for multiplayer and things like that. But at a base level, Turbo is really like, really a game engine. Like when you think of Godot or Unity or, anything else, Phaser, Turbo is that, just a lot more close to the Web3, like technology than any of these other game engines that are out there.
Okay, again, I think this is like a no, super noob question, but when I first heard about game engine, I think in my head I was thinking about something like a no code kind of platform, or where you can just start building games like right away. But it's like for me it's still hard to like imagine or envision like when you say game engine, is it some sort of API or is it some sort of SDK that helps developers build stuff, or what exactly is that you're saying? Like what exactly is that game engine?
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now, Turbo is a command line tool, and it's got a number of things in the technology stack that I won't go over in full detail. But a game engine is kind of a funny thing because a game engine is not just like one thing; it's like a bunch of things slapped together. So at a base level, for a game engine that renders graphics to exist, you need code that renders graphics. You need a rendering pipeline, and you end up having like shaders and GPU integration there to to talk to your computer to tell it how to render graphics. And you need some windowing code, which is the code that says like here's how you open a window and what size it should be and stuff like that. And you need code to handle events like user input, like mouse movements, keyboard interaction, things like that. So basically, Turbo does all of that, and then it wraps it up inside of a command line executable. So you can say, Turbo CLI is the name of the command, and you have like an init command, which will bootstrap a Rust project. And then you have a run command where you basically target that project and it'll open the window and run your game. And as you make changes to your game code in Rust, it'll automatically recompile the game. So you don't have to like keep on, manually opening and closing and compiling your game. It hot reloads as you write the code, which is really nice for doing things quickly and getting that feedback loop, kind of like a live coding environment. And the same for your assets too. If you have sprites in your game, if you're editing those sprites, Turbo automatically updates the sprites as you're making changes. So right now it's really more developer centric in terms of like, who's going to have the best time using Turbo because it doesn't have like a ton of windows and, other than the game window. But in the future, we'll have a proper desktop application and we'll port a lot of the stuff that's being developed right now to the web as well. So you should be able to use it in the future by simply going to Turbo's website. In fact, at the moment, there is like an older version of Turbo on the web for basically what was an MVP that Turbo developed over the summer. So we'll be bringing that up to parity with the command line tool sometime over the next couple weeks.
Love this, love this. And I think that's one reason why we are super excited about this integration or partnership, because it really I've been talking, like we have been internally talking to like a lot of game developers, and one of the comments that we have encountered so far is that it's hard to build games. So if there are more platforms like Turbo, which is like making things easier for developers to like bootstrap their projects for games, I think it's a big win for the entire ecosystem. And I'm gonna end up trying all of the repo. Like I basically went through like your repo. Yeah, and I think I was just talking to Dino before this call, and I was like, I had to schedule a call or like do some sort of workshop with them. So yeah, that's something that which might end up cooking, but yeah, that's for some other time. So do you know, maybe we can like switch over to the integration details and the Fluent's execution environment for games. How do you envision the impact of on-chain games within the Fluent's ecosystem? I know like we are internally very bullish. We have been talking to a lot of games. So how do you think that Fluent makes like an optimal environment for game developers, and why so?
Yeah, for sure. So there's probably a couple things to frame first to really understand the true impact in the Fluent ecosystem. So there are basically two ways to deploy applications on Fluent, and kind of I'll say two like broad categories of applications. The first are shared apps, and so what those are essentially, it's just our term for smart contracts in an enshrined shared state environment. So we have like an enshrined smart contract platform. And same kind of experience as like Ethereum L1. So pretty straightforward. The unique part is you can deploy these apps in Rust, in TypeScript, and Solidity even, and they can all kind of synchronously compose together. So that's shared apps. Then there's sovereign apps. So this is built using our Fluent-based framework. You can basically customize like isolated kind of state machines that aggregate their proofs and get have the proofs verified on Fluent. Some people call these L3s. Some they could be app specific rollups. They can technically be blockchains. They in some sense the blockchain part could be like an implementation detail. They do not have to be blockchains. There's a huge design space for sovereign apps. And so circling back to kind of where kind of we see this integration and why we think it's very impactful for the Fluent ecosystem is because it actually touches on both of those categories. It has the potential to touch on both of those categories of applications. So to start, like some low-hanging fruit, as Josiah was mentioning, is to integrate like just with the Fluent like RPCs basically. So the games that are developed with Turbo that the logic is not on chain can kind of interact and read and write to kind of the Fluent smart contract environment to shared apps. So that's one thing, and I think that's like a good place to start. Where it gets even more interesting is actually enabling the game code of these Turbo apps to be ZK proven. Now, what enables this, as Josiah mentioned before, is that like the execution environment for these Turbo games, and I'm sure Josiah could talk much more about this, but just to kind of like tease it a little bit, they're built kind of with WASM as a compilation target. So what ZK WASM can enable, and this is kind of getting into the sovereign app territory, which we need to kind of build out more functionality to support this over time. But we can actually, help progressively decentralize, the actual game logic. And this, I think, gets interesting because we were talking about, Jai was saying before that there's this whole kind of spectrum of on-chain games, and like, people, we want to encourage people to explore that full spectrum, and it doesn't even have to stay like static over time for a given application. Like you can kind of start off and you can have, none of your logic on chain, and you can just kind of read and write to the chain. Then you can kind of like start progressively putting, more of that logic on chain to, as the infrastructure, as Fluent basically is able to scale your kind of like throughput requirements and stuff like that. So like you can kind of, what's interesting about it is you can kind of like flexibly, progressively put more stuff on chain and make it, you know, verifiable. Um, and so yeah, we find that to be a really compelling like design space. We're really excited that to explore it with Turbo, especially. And I think that it becomes impactful to the broader ecosystem because it just starts to show what's possible on top of Ethereum that was not previously possible before. And because, you know, mostly what people think about when it comes to kind of scaling solutions on top of Ethereum are just other blockchains or other smart contract environments. And yes, that's kind of part of the story, but I think what ZK Wasm unlocks is just a vast design space beyond that. And so we're certainly very excited about it, and we can't wait to see you know, what gets built with Turbo.
Awesome. Yeah. You mentioned WebAssembly, and I think one of the things that Turbo is, I mean, Turbo is basically, they have WebAssembly into their infrastructure, right? So I just want to ask this question, like, it's a curious question. Like, what prompted you guys to like integrate WebAssembly into Turbo's infrastructure? Is it because of its browser compatibility, or is it because WebAssembly is just fast? Like, what was the design decision when you were thinking about like what exactly what should be the infrastructure, and like how did you fall into this WebAssembly? Yeah, I think the question is like, why WebAssembly?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because it is like not necessarily like, you know, a straightforward answer. So there are a few reasons. One is that I just like WebAssembly, like being a web developer for many years. That's just like one of the coolest web standards that's come, you know, to existence over the past decade. And I've worked on open source projects like Greenlang, where it's literally a language that compiles to WebAssembly. So I've just been kind of in the weeds with WebAssembly for a while. And like when I started to really do more indie game development myself, I realized exploring different game engines that they all kind of have their own preferred language. And that's like, you know, kind of annoying. If you have to like use Lua in one game engine, you have to use C++ in another, and then you move to another, and it's kind of like Python. It's like, wow, man, like why do I have to learn a new language every time I switch to a different game engine? So WebAssembly is kind of a nice way around that because at a certain point, I think you get to have your choice of language. Right now, Turbo has a Rust SDK as a default, but being based on WebAssembly, you have a variety of languages at your disposal. You can use Golang, C, Rust, Zig, and even through some, you know, like sort of shenanigans, you can get JavaScript going through QuickJS and even things like Python and Lua, as long as you have like that WebAssembly executor for those kinds of languages. So the doors just really blow wide open for accessibility ultimately. If someone does not have to, you know, relearn how to code to make a game, that's a big win in my book. And then from like a technical standpoint, moving past like the developer experience, it's that you can ship WebAssembly on any platform. You can run it in a browser, obviously. And one of the weird use cases about WebAssembly that's like kind of counterintuitive is that it's not like actually limited to the web. It's just a bytecode format. And there are plenty of ways to run WebAssembly bytecode natively. And in fact, that's what Turbo does when you run it from the command line. It will actually run your WebAssembly code via a Rust runtime. And the other thing that is unique about WebAssembly bytecode is that you can swap it out at runtime. So that's actually how hot reloading works in Turbo. Is that when you make a change to your game code, what happens is it just swaps out the WebAssembly bytecode that it's running in the game engine with the newest version. And to make it even smoother, what it does is it actually kind of like caches your game state in the background. So you don't lose things like, you know, the position of your sprites and things like that when you do make changes to your game. But yeah, it's really hard to do with targeting native code. If you're like doing LLVM or something like that, it just becomes like a little bit of a challenge. So having like a portable bytecode format that can run cross-platform is kind of like a superpower for a game engine, honestly. It's a bit of an underrated move. I expect more game engines to do this over time, honestly, because it's just too tantalizing not to. And I guess like the other thing is like you can literally run your your bytecode in non UI context as well. Like if I wanted to, I could literally run game loops of a turbo game on a server, or in the future potentially on a WASM execution environment like Fluent. So a lot of really cool reasons to use WebAssembly.
Yeah, well, I think that's just awesome for you, and I'm super bullish. And it's funny because I was back in the days when I was doing my computer science degree, we had this course on WebAssembly, assembly language, and I was very close to failing that course. And now I'm just talking about it, and like all my friends are like, Remember, like you were supposed to flunk out of your degree, or yeah." I think it was, yeah. That's how days change. Anyways, I think we are coming up on time, so I don't want to waste any more time here. And I think we have got some community questions that I'm just gonna ask to you guys. But if any of you here, if you guys have any questions, feel free to request. We're gonna make sure that we have you on the stage. I think so. The first question they have is something that we might have covered or you might have answered already in the comments, Josiah. But they're asking what's the difference between Turbo and Mud, or maybe Dojo.
Yeah, I'll just keep it brief. And the main difference is that Turbo focuses more on the rendering part of a game engine, the client part. So if you wanted to, you could actually, combine Dojo and Turbo, since Dojo usually you're going to use like Phaser or Unity or something like that to really integrate with your like Cairo contracts and stuff. Um, and yeah, I think that's really the main difference. Is Turbo is not a protocol; it's really the rendering code.
Okay. The next question is, how will this partnership utilize WASM for specific use cases, like just casual games, or maybe games that are heavy asseted or peer-to-peer applications? I think they're just asking the same question, like why exactly WASM? And it goes both ways, like why we chose WASM for the execution environment, and like why Turbo chose WASM for their infrastructure. And I think that's pretty clear. Like the use cases, or like what's possible within WASM, it's the design space is huge here, and you can pretty much build anything. And the fact that you only have to code once and it will run across different browsers, I think it's yeah, I think that's a USP for like a lot of developers. It saves times, it saves resources, and it yeah, you don't have to like rebuild the entire stuff again and again. um yeah, it was supposed to be answered by you guys, but I just did. Anyways. We have a last question. It's can you elaborate on Turbo's container technology that will be optimized for WASM? um
Yeah, I'm not sure I fully understand that question.
I'm not sure as well. They're asking about Turbo's container technology. I'm not sure what that is or what that means.
Yeah, container technology. I guess that's the part that would be challenging for me to answer. How it's going to be optimized for WASM, I can speak more to, because maybe in a ZK WASM execution environment, you might have more of a constrained system where doing computation is expensive, and if you're running like an entire game on that execution layer, it might just be something that takes too long or is not cost effective for that to work. So I would imagine that, in a ZK environment, Turbo might have to slim down its API of what could run in that environment to be suitable for generating ZK proofs. But if that is not the question, I'm sorry. I hope that kind of maybe answers it. And if not, then please, follow up with clarifications, and I'll do better to actually answer.
Yeah, feel free to DM them after the session. But yeah, well, I think thank you both for like giving us a peek into first the on-chain gaming world, and like the potential of like this partnership between Turbo and Fluent. I think it's well best suited for us to like work together, given that we have same strategic alignment, we have technology that matches or that fits together very perfectly. um, yeah, any last thoughts before we wrap this session?
My last thought is, I think like we have a lot of opinions and, we've answered a lot of questions, but I think one of the best things you can do in gaming is listen to the game developers and listen to the players and do as much as you can to help them do what they want to do. So if anybody has, any thoughts or recommendations or, has encountered any road bumps trying to ship a game, either, partially or fully on chain, feel free to always, reach out and share those thoughts because that's really the reason Turbo exists ultimately. It's not to, be a company, it's not to be a game engine, it's to help people make games and to help them do it in, what is a reasonable timeline. Because it can be, even without the Web3 part, it can be totally something that takes much longer and has a lot more challenges than you might expect going in. So I want to be very receptive to any of the struggles that people have in that journey and do as much as I can to make it as simple and as fun as possible. Because, actually making the games themselves, I think, should be as fun as playing them. And I have a personal hot take that the more fun you have making a game, the more likely that it is going to be fun for other people to play it too. So I'll leave it at that.
Love that. Love that. Make games fast and have fun making them. That's fantastic. Cool. Yeah, no, closing thoughts. I mean, I'm just very excited for what's possible here. I think like Josiah was saying, there is kind of like a full spectrum of, what people can do on chain, and it'll be really I'm excited to work with kind of turbo developers, and see kind of like what parts they actually want to put on chain versus what parts they don't, and then for us to kind of optimize things on the Fluent side to enable that. And like I do really think it's important from our vantage point. We want to provide like our North Star is just the best possible developer experience. And so it's really a lot of our roadmap and priorities are going to be shaped around, some of the needs of these initial use cases. So yeah, if you're a turbo dev or you want to be a turbo dev, um, please like reach out to one or both projects, and we're very very excited to dig into it with
Yeah, and make games fun again, I guess.
you. Yes.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, I think we don't have any more questions. Nobody is raising hands. Yeah, okay, all right. I think we are good to wrap this up. But if anyone here is listening, they have any questions or they want to try building games on Turbo, they want to experiment deploying smart contracts on Fluent or whatever, feel free to reach out to us. Drop by in our Discord channels, reach out to the team members, like whoever. By the way, I just wanted to raise one thing. So I don't know if you guys know about this, but Turbo, I guess Josiah right here is like a Swiss knife army. Like whatever you guys are seeing at this point, it's just him. Uh, and that's something that he said in the very first call that we had, and I still remember that. And I was laughing because I had my camera off, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I mean, this is great. This is super great." But yeah, thanks all for joining. Thanks, Josiah. Thanks, Dino.